everyone. Welcome to the Hands-On CISO podcast. My name is Adi, and today we'll be talking to Michael Hensley. Michael's been in the security field for almost a decade, and today is the head of cybersecurity and HIPAA security officer of Modern Health. Michael, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Can't complain for a Monday. Thanks for having me.
Of course, amazing. So before we get into what you do today, could you tell us how did you get into security?
Yeah, so it was honestly it was a little bit of luck, a little bit of hard work. The luck part came first, I'd say. I was working as a software developer, and I just happened to be assigned to a company-wide initiative where we'd be working with the director of product security at the company that I was at, and I was really interested in what this person did. I was like, oh, like a cybersecurity person, how cool. So I had all these questions for him. At the end of this meeting I was in, because the meeting ended a couple minutes early, I asked him how he got into security and what are some of the things that he learned to take that career path, because I had never like really talked to somebody who was a security professional at that point, because I was like fresh into my tech career. And then this was still in the days where companies had desk phones. And so, the next week my desk phone rang and he was on the other side, he said, hey, you have a really good background to learn to do this job. I have an opening on my team. Would you like to switch over to my team? And so talked it over with some folks in my personal life. And I was like, all right, let's do it. I can always go back to software development if I don't like it. And then I've just been doing it ever since.
Cool. And what would you say are the biggest changes you've seen in this field since?
I think the biggest thing, just like anything in or just like the general trend in tech, is just the move to cloud. I remember part of my first security job at that company was I was running vulnerability scanners. I was scanning our data centers, which like hardly any people have anymore. And then when I followed that person who was my boss at my first company, who ended up being my mentor, I followed him to the next company. That company also had on-premise servers and on-premise file server, but kind of AWS was starting to be super hip and cool and just like moving everything to the cloud. And so as I've kind of journeyed through my career, things have become more and more and more cloud-based. The company I work at right now, we don't have like a home office where people work out of, or that has special network access. It's like people working from home. It's people going on vacation and being like, oh, I'll work a couple days and then take the next week off. So it's really moved to everyone is everywhere, and then the things that we're running in terms of processing data or like all of the company's assets are just running in the cloud. So it's gone from thinking about how do you secure bare metal to how do you secure people's access in the cloud, and just how do you secure your kind of cloud-based assets in general.
Interesting. Would you say that your experience as a software engineer from before is something that helps you a lot on a daily basis?
Absolutely. My mentor was right when he said, hey, your software development background will be really helpful. I think especially in the application product security space, knowing what a developer's life cycle is, knowing what are the pain points of being a software developer. Even though I didn't do it that long, I still kind of remember some of the things that took the longest for me, or that I struggled with, or were really annoying. And so I think I've kind of carried that through my career, as I've tried to think about like, hey, the developer first security experience. I mean, there's more to security than just that, but like I got my start in application and product security, and it really helped to kind of move over to the space and be like, all right, I have this like fundamental understanding about how to write code. Wasn't an expert at it by any means, but then knowing, hey, I need to secure it. Like I've kind of been in the shoes of someone who has to meet a project deadline and like write this feature. So like, how do I think about like moving security into that space? And I also think, as I've taken over more and more areas of securities at my different stops along the way, including at this job, I've always tried to put myself in like the employee's mindset to say, hey, will an employee actually follow through with this process? Will they actually use this tool when we're picking solutions for modern health, or we're building security into business processes? It's can I fit that into someone's workflow where, one, they'll remember to do it, and two, it won't be so annoying or so cumbersome that they just will ignore it altogether. It's like, oh, I really got to get this in, but I can't follow this secure process, so I'm just going to do it this way. So trying to meet people where they're at, I think, has really helped in my career, and I think it's like really important, especially as you get into security leadership, to really think about that and make sure that you and your team are doing things that kind of meet the business, how the business is being done.
Amazing. What do you think in security? I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
It's all right.
What does your day-to-day look like? Because I know that mostly security professionals have a lot of things going on at the same time.
Yeah, so I can't speak for other folks, but my day to day is head of security at Modern Health. I always joke with my team that I'm the paperwork guy. So um, the way that I try to run my team is I try to get them as much time as I can solving the kind of the interesting engineering security challenges that come with being like a cloud first company and a startup. And so like my day is a mix of making sure my team's enabled, so they have all the correct information to do the projects that they're working on, advance our security controls, and then it's like thinking ahead to the company strategy. Hey, what's going on in the business right now? Are we prepared for it? Are there things we need to think about? And then that trickles down to, okay, well, we need to do this. Am I going to need to ask for more budget money next year, or do I need another person on my team to be able to cover this area? And then I'm also have to keep one eye on the compliance piece. We have an amazing legal team here at Modern Health. I mean, everyone's amazing, but I work a lot with our legal team to think about, our compliance readiness, because we operate internationally. We also process health data in the US. So we're involved in just about every regulation that has letters that you can think of. And so kind of keeping a thumb on that, making sure that we are staying in compliance on a day-to-day basis, working with some of the vendors that we do to make sure that we stay in compliance, and then also kind of thinking about our strategy for the future. Hey, do we need to do more attestations? So Modern Health does a SOC 2 Type 2 audit every year. And so thinking about the future, what's it going to take to kind of move the needle for our next set of customers. So it's kind of a mix of all those. And so you got to wear a lot of hats at once. And when I got into this job, I was not the most organized person. So definitely have been working on my organization and prioritization. So, but we have luckily some amazing folks who have done leadership for a while that I've kind of gleaned tips from. But yeah, it's basically a lot of, wearing all those multiple hats and making sure my team stays happy, making sure the company advances its security posture.
Wow. And how would you say doing security in a health tech company different than doing security in maybe something more dry, maybe more tech?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely advantages and disadvantages. So uh, I'll start with the advantages first because I'm a glass half full person. Um, there's a lot of scrutiny on highly regulated companies, whether it's like making sure we're following privacy regulations, making sure we are following like the HIPAA security rule. There's other states that have cybersecurity laws as well in the US. So people understand operating in healthcare that security is kind of tantamount to making sure that you have a good business. And so I'm lucky in that aspect where people realize from like a leadership level on down, we have to take security seriously. We can't just ignore the security team because, well, one, the law says that we can't, but then also we are in kind of one of those sectors that is targeted more by attackers. It's like healthcare, public utilities. You see all the time in the news, healthcare companies getting breached. So there's definitely a lot of a lot of good data out there for attackers to try to get if they could breach a healthcare organization. So I think people understand that inside the company. So that makes my job easier. I don't have to go convince people that security is important. But kind of the downside to that is there's just extra work involved. Being in a highly regulated industry, I spend sometimes a good chunk of my time thinking about compliance, thinking about making sure that we're staying on track with audits and other things of that nature. I would think maybe at another company where there weren't as many regulations, I could spend my time maybe doing some other things. But overall, I really enjoy the healthcare space for that reason, because I think that there's kind of like, you have to have security for entry. Like there's not a company, at least I not that I know of, where it's like, oh yeah, we're a healthcare company, but we just like, we don't have a good security program. I think people who are smart, who are leaders in those types of companies, really think about the fact that, like, hey, security is a business asset. Security will drive our business forward, even though security is a cost center. Like, I don't make the business money. We take budget, we have headcount. Like, the contributions we make, don't drive our product forward for the most part, but we are reducing risk, and we are, helping the company stay compliant. And so that is a business asset. And so, like, I do enjoy, the regulated space for that reason.
Cool. Do you think that you say that because you're in health tech, people are much more aware that it needs to be a certain way? But how much time do you spend on educating, not specifically your team, but just like employees in the company on the different risks, versus how much time do you spend on implementing barriers that will not allow them to make mistakes, I guess, that could affect the security?
Yeah, that's a good question. It really, I'll give you the classic security answer. It depends. Sometimes, there's a season where the focus is on, employee education. We do education stuff throughout the year. We think that's important for our team. So, we do security awareness training every year. We're always making sure we have touch points inside of engineering, inside of tech, and inside the company when it comes to kind of educating people on security best practices, or making sure that security stays at the forefront of people's minds. Because even though we are in that regulated space, it's easy to get absorbed into your day-to-day jobs. When you're at a startup, it's go, go, go. And so we try to stay in front of that as much as possible. But based on, what I think, and more importantly, like what our team thinks the company might need, there's, sometimes there's just more investment in, hey, let's put on guardrails and then detective controls. Sometimes if there's an area that, hasn't been explored as much as other areas, um, we might spend more time at the beginning, putting in detective controls, doing like an internal team audit ourselves, saying, all right, let's explore this area. Let's explore the processes here. And then after that happens, we can spend time. Hey, we understand now how this part of the business operates. We'll spend part of our time kind of educating, and then part of our time, kind of building guardrails. If we find anything where we're like, hey, we would like to mature the controls or the processes in this area. So it kind of fluctuates, but yeah, I try to kind of keep a balance of like, hey, we're building guardrail controls, but then we're also educating as well. Because you could build the best guardrail controls in the world, but if you're not kind of focusing on the people on a regular basis inside the company, I think I've seen somewhere, I couldn't tell you exactly where, that like kind of people are the number one cause for security breaches. And so we try really hard to help people, or prevent people from like even causing a breach with some of the controls we build, but also reminding people like, hey, these threats are real, and you can do this to help the company out if you build security into your processes, or do this or that to like help our posture going forward.
Interesting. I remember in one of the conversations I did, I was speaking to Andrew Rose, who's a very experienced CISO, and he was talking about how most security teams put 90% of their efforts into the tech, but most of the breaches, like 90% of the breaches, are because of the people. So it's like there's some sort of imbalance there. So it actually leads me to my next question of, when you do put these the blocks, to put it that way, do you ever feel like a bad cop? Is there ever situations that you have to be like, no, we can't do this?
Oh yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say all the time, but there's definitely times when it's more of a like a, hey, I understand what you're doing here, but for this reason or that reason, we can't do this process like this anymore, or we have to change this over here. I think I tell people that I think this is why relationship building as a security team is really important. um, I tell the folks internally, I try my best to kind of build relationships with people, meet people where they're at, like, shake hands at company offsites and, really get to know different people I'm working with, especially like the strategic stakeholders, because it's not an if, but a when. Like when it comes time to have that difficult conversation, it's not like I'm just showing up out of nowhere and being like, you can't do this anymore. People are like, oh, I know this person, um, you know, he has gotten he's tried to know me, and, you know, Mike's not a bad guy. He's just doing his job, and he is trying to keep like the company safe. And I think that has really been a benefit for my career. Myself and then the rest of our security team, we really work hard to like not just participate in the company, but be culture carriers as well. I take my job seriously, but I don't take myself that seriously at work. So a lot of jokes, lots of memes, other things to kind of try to keep security as light as possible, because there will come a time when, each department, we have to have like a conversation with them around like, hey, we've got to change this, or, later down the road, we need to fix this issue that we have, or, this process is out of date. Like, let's do something else. And so it's hard for people to change their workflows. But if you're talking to someone who you feel like wants wants to know you and understand you like in a genuine way, and, wants to support the work that you're doing, but then also comes to you and says like, hey, you have to change the way you're doing things, I think people are much more open to that, than if you just kind of stand behind your wall of mystery, I guess, as a security person, then only come out when you're telling people no.
Yeah, I could see how that could be less appealing to people if that's all you're doing. Have you ever seen or experienced in your career a big security breach? Of course, you don't have to say companies or names or anything.
Yeah, I mean, I've lucked out that, in my I think every company has, incidents, or things that they have to investigate. I mean, that's just part of the job. I've lucked out. I haven't, been a part of like any major security breaches. So I feel for the folks that I see in the news. I know people are apt to pile on sometimes, where it's like, oh, this company, like, look at them, like they got breached. It's like, this is a hard job. Like, this is a really hard job. And depending on, depending on business circumstances, or depending on like the fact that like, hey, it only, you can spend all year building up controls, and then, like you mentioned earlier, like some person can make one honest mistake, or, one control can go wrong, or one detection can go missed, and that's the cause. And so I think that's why a lot of folks in the industry get super stressed out, because, we need to try to operate 100%, all the time. And sometimes, if it goes down to 99%, you can miss that one thing. So I feel for the folks. Like, I haven't, personally had to kind of go through recovering from a major incident. Fingers crossed that I don't have to in my career. But, I have a lot of empathy for the folks that have done that.
How do you feel when you hear about a company that got breached, or when like when you experience it from the side as someone who understands it a bit more than the masses on the news and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been, as both like an engineer, like and like here at Modern Health, I've gotten that message like, hey, we need to look into that. It's like, all right, guess my wife's on her own to like feed the kids tonight at dinner. Yeah, some of the big ones that you see in the news, I'm like, okay, that, the response teams, they're working, 10, 12 hours, sometimes more, to like recover from this. They're working late at night. So like I hear that, and I'm like, I have a lot of empathy for them. And then it's always really interesting to get to, whenever companies are willing to be transparent and publish their like root cause analysis. It's like interesting from, a measuring perspective for someone like us at Modern Health to say like, hey, have we thought about this before? Or, do we have the preventative controls? And so, I think we can all learn from each other as companies. And so, I have a lot of empathy for folks that have to go through that. And then, it's also one thing that, if companies are smart, they can see, uh, if there are breaches in the news, hey, how did this initially happen? Hey, do we have controls for that? Because it's not just like a hypothetical point at that. We can point to something and say, hey, this company, was breached because they didn't put these controls in, or, the way that this process worked for them, internally wasn't secure because of X, Y, and Z. Are we doing that here? If not, we should. Or if we are, that's a good, I kind of use that, like that's a good kind of talking point for the company. Hey, luckily, we have some really smart engineers on the security team, who have put these controls already in place. And so this is a good reminder as to, hey, on a day-to-day basis, folks may be like, we have to work a little slower because of security, but then, it's something that we can point to say like, hey, no, there are real world implications here. We understand that this might be a little bit more of a blocker. We understand that this might make your day just a tiny bit harder, but hear me out. Like, these are important. It's hopefully, some of these controls are the difference between us staying out of the news because of security and being in the news. Like, I as much as I can, I'd like our company to be in the news for anything besides like a cybersecurity breach. So,
Well, how often is it that you see some sort of breach or security event on the regular media, and that causes your company or any company that you've been in to actually implement something new or change something that exists?
yeah, I think, I, I've seen it happen like at multiple companies that I've been at, where it's like, oh, we haven't thought of that, or we haven't put as much time into this as possible, or hey, this company is way bigger than us. We're a smaller company. I've worked at like small to medium startups most of my career. The first company I was at was like a really large company. And so you can also use it as like a future thinking roadmap thing. Hey, this is not maybe a problem that we would have right now just because of our small scale, but as we scale up, this is something that we'll need to think about. So I think if folks are smart, then we shouldn't just as like a community be looking at other companies that are breached and say, wow, sucks for them, like our security controls are the best, because it's like we're always fighting a losing battle here. So having empathy, but then also like being smart about saying like, all right, well, could this happen to us, and like let's spend the time to think about if it could, and do some research on that. So I think just about every company can kind of learn from hopefully other companies, like breaches that are reported, but then also from folks that are doing things right. Would love to see more of in the community being like, hey, we put these controls in 6 months ago and they paid off. We had an attack that failed because of this. And so like I think we could probably do more as a security community to kind of give each other some like positive fist bumps about like, hey, we put these controls in and these work, and be like, oh yeah, we should invest in that too. So I think it's just it's one of many things that folks should be using. I think the other nice thing about being in 2024 is there's a lot of really good security frameworks. There's a lot of good security best practices and principles. So cybersecurity is not one of those things where it's like it's shrouded in mystery, but it's like, hey, there's a lot of really good information out there. It's just the implementation that's hard. So like constantly trying to measure yourself against industry standards and constantly trying to measure yourself against what other good security minded companies are doing, I think is really important also.
Are CISOs very connected to each other? Like when something happens, is there a chat going on?
I want to be part of that chat. That sounds great. Yeah, I think for me personally, with COVID and working as like a remote based company, like I don't really live in like a big city. I live in Eugene, Oregon. It's a couple hours south of Portland, where University of Oregon is. So there's not really a good community here for me to be involved in. I think if I lived in a bigger city, I get invites every once in a while to like network with peers. And I would, if I, didn't have kids, I'd probably take folks up on that. I do think that it seems like there's a lot of CISO group chats out there. And so like, if there's a fellow CISO in there who get me into one of those group chats watching this podcast, like please send me the invite. But I do think that that's important. I think just in general, relationships and being connected with folks who like kind of understand what you're going to is really important, because it can be kind of lonely sometimes. Because when I was a security engineer, it's like I had my fellow engineers to kind of like, oh, this sucks, or like this is hard, or like, yeah, I'm struggling with this, can you help me out? But normally, unless you work at like a giant company, there's just one person who's like the leader of security. And so that can get a little lonely sometimes, because like I do have at my job, I'm thankful to have a really good tech leadership group kind of led by our CTO and CPO. And so I have community there, but I am a little bit on an island by myself. So I do think, community is really important. And so, yeah, so some people need to come in and do some, some meetups or something in Eugene, Oregon. And I'll definitely be there if that's the case.
Maybe you're the person who needs to do them.
That's true.
Just
Yeah. Why
saying.
am I saying I'm making a plea to, people that I haven't met yet? Maybe I need to like walk my own walk and and do this. So
Interesting. So when you talk about like the team and the community, it makes me think a lot about how stressful like the CISO role is and how much it's uh it's sometimes not talked about much. How do you experience that?
yeah, I think um I'm not a psychologist. I don't have a psychology major or degree of any kind, but just from my own personal experience, and maybe this is just, maybe I'm not a good multitasker or context switcher as some other people, but um, what I was, what I've been surprised about in this role is the constant context switching. It's the context switching. It's the uh, it's the different asks from people that have various levels of urgency, and then it's like help keeping the team on track. It's like there's just a lot of things that kind of build up as the load, and then it's like, oh, also like you rise and fall as like the security posture of your company does, where it's like I'm not an individual contributor. Like, I don't have a million hours a week to go fix all these controls. Like, I have to have a really strong team, which I'm thankful that I do. I have an amazing team that like you know kind of drive things forward. But you're just kind of like the pace of like, couple like the context switching with, the nature of the nature of companies is that, as you get more mature, like things slow down a little bit. And so I could have 1,000 things on my list, but when you take a look at, I don't want to burn my engineers out, what's actually realistic to improve here, it's like that list gets chopped down, way far. And so it's like we got a giant backlog of stuff, and we think, okay, the next 6 months, these are the top 10 or 15 things that we want to do. And so like that's not a lot of things, and for most companies, you know, the security team hopefully is well funded, but I don't have an unlimited amount of engineers, and so that's another source of stress. It's like, hey, am I prioritizing the right things? Am I doing the right stuff? So it's like it's kind of those two things. Like it does get stressful, and so like I have to really make sure that like I'm taking care of myself, taking vacation, and like I think that's where the team comes in, where I'm our company is a mental health company, and so I be disingenuous of us to kind of drive our folks into the ground and not think about how they're doing. I've been lucky enough to take multiple long stints of parental leave. Two of my kids have been born when I've been at this company, um, and I think being able to delegate to a strong team, taking time off, like is really important. But yeah, it can be stressful. So like that has to be built in too, where it's like I can't just drive myself into the ground with worry or try to get more done than is possible. Like being realistic, and then leaning on your team, being confident about what you're working on. So like that's a factor. I was surprised getting into this about like those two things, like the context switching and then just like not being able to do anything. Like that does get really stressful. And I can get stressed out if I'm not like careful about it.
So, hi everyone. If you're watching us on video, you can see that we have changed locations and outfits. We had to stop that recording in the middle, and we're going to continue from the same question that we left last time. What we were talking about was how do CISOs stay updated in a field that's like changing so much and you have to learn all the time, but at the same time, you're also busy.
Yeah. So for me, I don't know what other folks do. I mean, I've talked to a couple folks about how they stay up to date. And so this answer could probably vary between people. But for me, it's kind of a combination of a couple things. My team and I were always kind of watching, as simple as this sounds, watching tech blogs or the news or other things to see, what security incidents or like if there's anything going on that's like hit the news. And then that's a way that we can kind of segue and deep dive to say, okay, well, how did this happen, or what's the reporting? Could this happen to us? What could we do to prevent this? So that's always kind of a nice thing. we have third-party partners that we pay that their job is basically to stay up to date with what's going on, and we get kind of intelligence from them and security bulletins on a regular basis that says, hey, you need to upgrade your Windows machines, or this is what's happening right now, or this new vulnerability came out. And so I think that that's really important as you mature your program, to have information sources that are well curated, that you pay for. I know that there's like expense there, but could be the difference between a security breach and finding a critical flaw in your system. And so I think that's always good. And then the other way, I might be in the minority on this, but I will, not all the time, but I will just take different calls with vendors or people who do cold outreach, or at least research when people kind of do like cold sales calls, to see what products they have and what's going on in the market. I mean, the security software market, I'm sure, is billions and billions of dollars. But like looking at it from a business side, it's if companies are successful and they have a lot of logos, they must be selling something of use, or maybe they're just really good salespeople. But we've looked at different products at our company, including, companies who are early startups, where it's like, wow, that's a really interesting idea. This would solve these gaps for us. Right? Even if like the fit's not there, we don't have budget. It's always good, I think, to just on a regular basis see what's selling out in the market. Because if something's selling, it means companies think that they need it for one reason or another, and then you should evaluate, well, if everyone's doing it, the old adage, like adage, like if everyone's do it, would you do it? Well, in this case, sometimes that is the true. Like if a bunch of companies have this type of software, this type of platform, it might be worth looking into seeing if that would fit for your company.
I think it's also in the psychologically, you would rather not make a mistake that everyone else is not making. So if everyone is protecting themselves from something, even if that's not the biggest risk, if you do get compromised in that way, it makes you look very bad because everyone else will. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's, I think, a lot of, some of the software that I've seen trying to be sold, I'm like, I don't know what the use case for this would be, or I don't think that this risk is, really high. But you do have a point where software tends to follow reducing risks in certain areas where there like actually is malicious actors. And so it is something to pay attention to.
Interesting. What do you think is one of the biggest challenges in cybersecurity today?
Oh, that's a good question. Go a lot of different ways with this one. I think from my vantage point and my job, I have a really great team of folks who are really good technically, and can execute and can help folks in the organization. I think honestly the biggest challenge from like a leadership standpoint is getting budget, getting alignment from people. There's all these competing priorities in a business, and you really have to work the relationships. You really have to get to organizations that value security. But then like once you're there, like you have to build the relationships, and you have to be able to articulate in sometimes a non-technical way why something is a big deal. And I think that's really challenging sometimes, because you could go to a security engineer and someone could say, oh, well, if we don't, update this software, or, do this particular thing, here's all the technical risks, and here's what could potentially happen. But then trying to talk to somebody like a CFO, or, some other executive leader who, doesn't necessarily know or understand all this technical jargon, like bringing it to a really high level and saying, hey, this is happening to other companies, or if we don't address this risk, here's what could happen to like our bottom line dollar. Sometimes that's challenging to quantify, because I'm sure that there are plenty of companies, I don't know any off, I'm not like being passive and saying I know any off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are plenty of companies that have not great security practices, or maybe they've underinvested in security, but then they don't get breached. And some of it actually does come down to luck. And then there's always more that you could do. And so it's that like prioritizing, and it's the, trying to build those relationships and figure out how to, get things done. I guess it's not like the easiest thing in the world. And it's like something that I think is like maybe it's not underrated at this point, but it's like something non-technical that is super important that you have to do.
Interesting. So I find it really interesting that I asked you about like what the biggest challenge in cybersecurity is, and you didn't talk about a specific cybersecurity thing. You're talking about communication thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like cybersecurity fits into a business. I mean, you don't have risk without, processing information or having something that's like worth adversaries taking. And so it is like it's kind of I think that's why we see a lot of these breaches. Maybe not the whole reason, but I'm sure it's a part of it where it's like figuring out how to talk to the right people to get things done is like it's really challenging. I mean, but that's how it is, I think, for other parts of the business too. It's like how do you function as a part, but then also advocate for yourself as well when people have priority or conflicting commitments.
How do you balance the I look at it as, you have these three things. One, you have your team that you have to take care of, manage, communicate with. You have management that has certain goals, certain agendas, the way they see the company going. And then you have actual work getting done, like making sure the company is secure. Like, how much of your attention goes to these different places?
Yes. So I got some really good advice in my career that leaning into like a company's kind of like planning and execution process as like a security leader, it's like you should be planning your work at certain times of the year, and like it's kind of a peaks and valleys thing. So like you climb the mountain, that's the planning part. Hey, what are we doing next? And so there's like a lot of focus there. So um, I remember like growing up, I don't do this anymore because I'm not really into like cycling racing, but we would like sometimes watch the Tour de France growing up, and like um, you have the different stages where they're just like pedaling super hard up the mountain. So you're going really intensely at some points in the year. You're planning, you're figuring out what's coming next. You talk it over with leaders, you talk it over with your team. This is what they're doing, and plans can always change. Like I'll caveat that, but for our company, it's like we go really hard twice a year figuring out, okay, this is the most important thing right now. I need to spend the most time on this. And then once that's done, then that part drops way down, and then it's all about getting the work done. So the time that you put into the planning, that shifts to making sure execution is good. And so I also, though, I need to take care of my team. I think I've been at different companies and talked to other folks where it's like churn is one of the biggest things that can slow you down. So and people are always going to leave, and we're not in an age anymore like my dad worked at the same company for like 30 years. That doesn't happen anymore. So like I'm not naive to that. People get other career opportunities, they want to work on different stuff. But when you have a really good team, it's like it's really important that you're investing. I try to invest like a minimum amount of time per week in my team, like one-on-ones, talking with them about projects, if they need help with something, making sure that they feel well taken care of so they can be engaged and they can do their best. And then I mean, that's also, non-work stuff too. So, we're a remote first company, but making sure that we're doing like, fun things over Zoom as best you can on a regular basis. And so that team investment, I think, is really important because people retain context the longer you're there at a company. And then, if you can provide people career opportunities. So I think that that's a really important thing too. And not just like, hey, I need to be this like really great strategist. And like, I need to like make sure that we're, driving and getting work done, but like when my team's happy, like things get done. And so there's always kind of that minimum chunk every week that I spend. That could be a little bit more based on like what projects are. Maybe I'm going to be a little more hands-on something that needs again a more cross-functional support, maybe hands-off other places, but that kind of stays constant. I would say that like team growth, team management, and then it's just kind of like a back and forth between like planning, getting things done, planning, getting things done.
Interesting. Do you think a lot of CISOs experience it in the same way, or is it very different in different industries, different companies?
From I can't speak for everyone. Like the places that I've worked and the different security leaders that I've watched, it's kind of a similar thing, but it's also like company specific. I think if folks are smart, because security is part of a business, I really try to lean into like what's the business doing for planning? What are they doing for work execution? Because it's like a business has when a business grows, it means that something's going right in terms of getting things done and like acquiring more customers. And so like kind of leaning into that process, like especially in like a tech org. And so everyone that I've seen and talked to kind of do like a similar planning thing. There's some folks that might plan way far ahead in advance. Like sometimes I will, think about, hey, what's a couple of years into the future look like? Not just like 6 months from now or like a year from now. But I think there you kind of have to. I mean, someone could come next week and be like, hey, you're wrong, and here's why. Be totally open to that. But I do think you have to keep one eye on the future, like one eye on the present, because if all you're doing is like heads down, I've got to do the next thing and the next thing, and you're not noticing, oh, the business wants to do this year, I've got to get prepared for that. Or, oh, 6 months from now, we have this like really important like decision to make. Like those types of things can sneak up on you, and I think you risk like working on the wrong things if you don't like kind of put your head up every once in a while and think about like what's the future holding.
Amazing. Is there something that you see security leaders missing? Like something that you think they should be paying more attention to?
Oh gosh, security leaders missing. I think, yeah, I guess the one thing for me is I read all the time, like on LinkedIn or other places, that it's like, hey, we have like a gap in the cybersecurity talent pool, and sometimes when you're hiring, like if you're hiring a first security engineer, you have to hire someone with experience, or it's like if this is your first security hire, or you're missing like a technical leader on the team, you have to hire based on aptitude and experience. But I think I wish that more folks would kind of come up with ways to invest in people who uh, want a shot at getting into the industry or don't have a lot of experience. What we did, I was lucky enough on my team where um, folks were really senior. And then we recently, a little less than a year ago, brought in two people that were, had never had a security job before. They like switched careers. And that's been really, really great. Like the energy that they've brought, the passion, like really great questions. Like it's been a really awesome experience. But it took some kind of like strategy and thinking about, hey, are we set up for doing this? Like, could we actually pull this off? And it's a little scary to say like, yeah, I'm going to trust parts of the security program to like someone who's never done this before. But I think if you put thought into it, and there's plenty of work that can be done by people who are brand new, who like maybe have certifications or like have a passion for learning. Great opportunity for like your more senior technical folks or leaders to like have opportunities to mentor, to teach, to get better at like that part. So I wish more people like invested in that, and I wish that there was more like jobs that were kind of like entry level, because I think people might be like a little afraid to say like, well, I need to hire someone experienced because there's so much going on. But there's like anyone can like set up a tool and go get like an API key and like read the results and go figure out like, well, is this a big deal or not? Like as long as they have like kind of mentorship. So there's like a lot of things that I don't necessarily think someone needs to have like 10 years of experience to do to like be effective. Like the folks that work for me that both just came in, they've been awesome the last year. Very effective. They work really hard. They've gotten a lot of like really critical stuff done for us. And that's all because like, my team has been the more senior folks on my team have really like poured into them, and they've really like set them up for success. So like I've been super happy about that. So I wish more, I wish I saw more kind of entry level jobs, and we got more like people into the field. And then I think it would just benefit us all as a whole.
First of all, it's lovely hearing you speak about your team that way. Like it shows the way you view them and the way you see this whole field, like wanting to help people who are getting into it. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to maybe get their first job in security or have one and want to advance?
Yeah, I would say like I would say two things. Like, don't give up. The job market's not great right now. I know there's a lot of folks trying to break in, but like keep working, keep learning, and then especially like keep networking as well. Like reach out to people, see what they're hiring for, like, go to meetups. Like now that there's meetups and conferences again, like go just talk to a bunch of people. I know that can be hard for introverts sometimes too, or maybe, even if you're an extrovert, sometimes it's a little weird to go up to people that you've never met before and like introduce yourself. But it is a skill that you need like in your career. Like you have to be able to talk to other people in a company when you're working as a security person for the most part, especially at a smaller company. And then I think like um, the second thing, like just kind of go on, I'd say like job boards and like what other people are hiring for, and learn those things, and then figure out as you're learning, like, hey, I really like this topic, so um, I'm gonna go learn about that. I feel like if you try to learn something where it's just like, okay, most people are hiring for this, so I'm gonna learn that. Maybe I don't necessarily like that much, but like this is what's in the market. You'll eventually burn yourself out if you're not interested in what you're doing, I think. Um, and so like figuring out what companies are hiring for, but like within that, figuring out what is interesting to you and what you think you would do really well. And like that's changed over my career, like every couple of years of like, oh, I think I want to do this. And then like a couple of years later, I'm like, oh, I want to try this thing. But, you know, figuring that out, like the intersection between like what companies are looking for potential employees, and then like also like what your passion is, because if you speak about something you're passionate about in an interview, like that really comes through. Like I can tell, like when I got to do the interviews for these last couple jobs, like people kind of spoke about, oh, I'm really interested in this, like I've been like learning this topic. I'm like, oh, that's great, because if I find something here that you're really interested in, you're gonna like go all in, and it's gonna you're gonna do a good job.
Perfect. What do you think this field is gonna be like in 2 years, in 5 years? Like, what's changing?
I think we had this like shift in like the 2010s, and maybe even like kind of before that, to like AWS cloud. And then I think honestly, like the just in general, people are getting things done, not so much with like these like homegrown, like home built tools and platforms that people use, but basically it's become a, hey, I have to do risk management for like third party vendors, because we have like 60 different companies that help us run our business, run our platform. And so I think that like that shift is just going to like continue. Like I think we're slowly getting to the point where gone will be the days where you've got I mean there will always be companies, maybe even like service companies that are like running on bare metal, or you have a company that maybe for various risk reasons has to deploy a lot of their own software, and even if they're using third-party software, they deploy it in their own environment. Like we do a little bit of that to reduce risk, but I think more and more it's going to be a shift to kind of this SaaS model. Like, hey, I need to make sure the third parties I'm sending my data to are secure, as opposed to like what data that like the company is storing. So it's going to be like less and less about um, you know on the fringe. It's going to be like you run your business with third parties. Maybe you have your core platform or your data stored in like a cloud service provider like AWS or Google Cloud. And then everything else is like, can I risk manage these third party vendors? And then I think along with that, like in the next 2 to 5 years, we're going to continue to see kind of attacks and risk management around like identity. It's more about now like who you are and what type of access you have, as opposed to like, oh, I have these servers with these like really bad vulnerabilities. It's managing who's got access to what, who has access to what data, who can go and make changes to some of these critical third parties. And so I think that there's just going to continue to be a shift around like kind of an identity and access management focus, as opposed to a, hey, we need to make sure that like all the assets we own are secure. I think that'll always be important. But I think now it's more of like, who's got access to what? Are we securing the front doors? Like, are we effectively, removing or granting access based on what people need? So I think that that's just going to get louder in the next 2 to 5 years.
How concerned are you about, well, how concerned or how excited are you about AI?
Oh yeah, I mean, maybe I'm just like maybe it's because like I'm getting older, or I have kids and turning into this like um, grumpy old man. But like I see all the people on LinkedIn being like, oh my gosh, like, AI is so risky. I'm like, this is really cool technology. Like, I don't know, the risk. This is just me personally. I'm probably gonna I'm people probably gonna make fun of me for this, but I'm just like, I don't see this as much different from like a risk profile perspective. It's like, all right, you have all these really cool third party tools. You have to figure out what data is going in, what data is coming out on their side, like what could potentially like be exposed. Like to me, like from like an AI risk perspective, like it's honestly like a little boring, but not in a bad way. Where it's like, I know people are like really excited about it, might be freaking out, but I'm like, yeah, this kind of seems similar to like other, third party like vendor risk profiling. But like in terms of like technology capability and what it could do to kind of unlock things, I think it's really exciting. I think that there's going to be a lot of tools that like say, hey, this is like AI powered, where people are just going to try to sell something. But I think in the next 5 years, we're really going to see um, where these tools can go in terms of like keeping companies safe. And I think that that's really, really exciting. I know there's a flip side to that too. Like attackers will not have access to like this AI technology, but you can't just hire like thousands of people to watch your security profile at a company. And so I think that this is really going to help in terms of defense and, noticing things that maybe aren't right in an environment, and like kind of making quicker decisions on things. So I think that piece will be super cool. So in that I'm excited about. I for the risk profile thing, I'm like, yeah, this, I think it's honestly like a little boring, but like important to think about that. But like from like a where this could go, I'm super excited.
Cool. I like your perspective. I think you're like, yeah, like we're gonna have to deal with this, and we will.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so one final question, because we're already at the end of our time. What do you like most about cybersecurity? Like, what really makes you interested in it?
I think no day or no year is the same. And I remember like I only did software engineering for a couple of years, but like when I was thinking about switching to this career, it was like, yeah, okay, we're gonna build like a new product. Okay, cool. We're gonna build like a back end and a front end, and there's some like new data going here and here. It's like, oh yeah, we're gonna like do some like asynchronous stuff. But like after a little while, even though it was only a couple of years, I was like, kind of seems like, kind of rinse and repeat stuff. I think any company that has like software engineering, it's like it's a lot of the same. When it comes down to it, there might be like interesting things that you're doing or problems that you've never solved before, but like there's this like kind of formulaic approach to this. Like I see the opposite is true for security. Based on who you are as a business, based on what direction the business is growing, whether it's staying the same or growing or shrinking, like all that stuff just can like make for like radical shifts. And I don't think that, and at least for me, I think that that's the best part, because it can be really stressful too. So it's like a double-edged sword. But I think the best part is like no day or week or year is ever the same, because there's always going to be things that come up where you're just like, oh my gosh, never saw that on my bingo card for the week. Or it's like, hey, we want to try to do this. Oh, great, we've never done that before. We're going to need to think about how to do such and such a thing, and make sure that risk is reduced. So I like that part. It's like, it's even you work at a place. I've worked at Modern Health now for like almost 3.5 years, and the business has changed so much. And like the job that I was doing a couple years ago is so much different than the job that I'm doing now, which is really cool. I don't think you get to say that about a lot of career fields. It's like you do something, and then after 2 years, 5 years, 10, it's like great. Like I've kind of seen it all, but like I'm sure that I have not seen it all in this field yet, and like I am not even close to that. And I think that that's really fun.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. I really liked your perspective. I feel like you're very open and honest, and the fact that you're what's the word? You're very fresh in this. Like you have a lot of new energy. Like that's what it feels like. That you want to learn, you want to do, and also it sounds like you really appreciate your team, which is very fun to hear.
I think I'm only as good as my team is, and I have a really good team right now. So I'm, they make my life a lot easier. I couldn't do all this stuff without them. So shout out to the team.
Shout out to the team. Okay, amazing having you.
Well,
Bye.
thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing this again. We'll see in like a couple years if I still have that like exciting energy, or if I'm burnt out by then. Hopefully I'm still locked in and pumped up. I really think I will be, but yeah, we'll see.
Amazing.